Hello, I'm John, also known as Blacktron One, which is what you've just been hearing, and you are in my studio, so welcome very much. I was very young, probably about 10, 11 years old, and we had a big old radio in the house, one of those proper brickies kind of radios, and it picked up long wave and short wave and all the rest of it. And I remember tuning it between stations one day, and I heard all this and static and extra stuff, and it was like seeing into another place. And I started doing Blacktron One back in 2002, and the whole point of it was to try and capture that feeling again. So I use radios and I use keyboards and field recordings and all sorts. So my whole thing is to try and create an atmosphere for myself that I'm interested in, and then because it's all improvised, I title the tracks and the records afterwards, and it's often the running order of how I put them in that determines whether or not it works, for want of a better term. So yeah, I played in lots of normal bands, quote unquote, but I've always loved doing this, and it's just become more and more involved since I started doing it, and I've broadened my scope with it over the years, to go from really ambient stuff to noise wall, because making music's the only time, especially like this, where it's all my rules, it's all my doing, and it's all myself. In terms of things like the creative process and how I get started into a piece, sometimes it depends. Sometimes it's a sound that I've found from putting things in the wrong order, or using a bit of gear the way it's not meant to be used. But oftentimes what I'll do, because I do my own photographs and covers and all that sort of thing, is that I will take a sort of feeling from what the image is that I'm going to use for the cover, and I'll work up to that. So I've always been a great believer, rightly or wrongly, that if you name a track something, then it should evoke that. So if the piece sounds like The Abyss, for example, if it's called The Abyss, it should sound like that, but in a total no compromise sort of way. So the good thing about doing this is that if I want to make something very quiet, if I feel like I want to do just a very quiet, gentle, soft, ambient piece, that's totally cool. If the next track has drums on and it's got upright bass on it, or keyboards or whatever, and it makes sense, then that's fine. The beauty of recording by yourself is you don't have to think about what your bandmates think about it, or how you present it to a label or anything like that, because the great thing about nowadays, if you want to release stuff on Bandcamp or SoundCloud or even on Spotify, you can, without having an intermediary. So it means that you're not having to think about, oh well, what's the single, because doing this sort of stuff there is no single. But I also know there's a lot of people out there who do this and variants of this, and I know, having talked to them, that a lot of them approach it the same way, whether they're coming to it from electronics or whatever. So I always try and make an atmosphere that I enjoy, and I listen to my own records a lot, because I think that the music you make should be the stuff you're the most into. Otherwise, what's the point in you doing it? If you are somebody who wanted to start making ambient or noise music or improvised music, there's a whole load of ways you can get into it. It is not, despite all the paraphernalia I've got on the go. When I started doing this, I had a delay and a distortion, and I just worked with it. It doesn't need to be a lot of things. If you get into stuff like no input mixing, for example, all you need is a really cheap mixer that's got ins and outs, and a few patch leads, and you're off, because you plug those ins and outs and the send and returns into each other, and then the mixer is the instrument. I would always say to people, as long as and this extends out to band life as well, but as long as you are enjoying the sound that you make, that's it. There is nothing else to this. So if you don't have to be a prolific neoclassical player or a accomplished jazz musician or anything like that, because those are their own disciplines. As long as you like the sound, you've done it correctly. So don't feel like I've got to have X, I've got to have a looper, I've got to have this before you get going. As long as you've got a way of recording yourself, that's totally cool. When I started doing more prolific recordings with Blacktron when I was living in London, and I was using SoundCloud, I did all the recordings on my phone, with my phone on top of the amp, and that was what I used. It didn't have to be mixed properly, it didn't have to be presented properly, because all I was trying to do was capture the feel of it. So if you want to do it, you can do it with a setup that you could use for playing in a wedding band. It doesn't have to be loads of crazy stuff. That helps, but it's not compulsory. So as long as you've got a drive and you've got a delay and an amp and something to put into those things, whether it's your voice or a bass or anything, that's it. That's all you need to do. So a big shout out to No Luck Audio for coming down and doing this in my space, which was not all that easy to do. A huge shout out to everyone that's out gigging and doing band stuff, whether they're solo or otherwise. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Heavy Repping, which is my pick company, where I sell other people's picks from independent makers, and a massive shout out to both Mike at Odessa Guitars, which is all the guitars I use, and John at Lateral Sound for making all my pedals. If you want to hear my stuff, you can go to blacktron1.bandcamp.com. It's all on there, 92 records or something in the last couple of years. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And if you didn't, okay.